helpful. So dysfunctional teams, frustrating at the time, perhaps funny, maybe it's cathartic to kind of laugh at them in retrospect. Ideally, it's helpful to do something more in the present to have a high performing team. Like, what can we take control of so that we can develop teams where we want to spend time in and where we get to do our best work? I think that's the aim, really, of us spending time in teams, that we should be better together. Like, I think otherwise we just work on our own, right? So how do we get better together? That's effectively, we probably should have called the podcast that instead of high performing teams. How do we kind of work better together is really what this is all about. And for this week's podcast, we borrowed some brilliance from Patrick Lencioni, who I actually had like a day-long course on this with a team about the 5 dysfunctions of a team, but I'd sort of forgotten about it, to be honest. And then Sarah must have read an article or surfaced it, and we were like, when you collect dots and you connect dots, like she was like, oh, I've just read this article, and I was like, oh, I went on a course with that, and we thought, and then I think we were also thinking about our team. Like, I think my team will tell me, but I think we have a pretty high performing team, but obviously there's always things that you can kind of improve upon. So I think the combination of Helen had been on a course and Sarah had read this article, and we were thinking about how do we help our team be the best it can be, all sort of came together to create the podcast. So genuinely, when we record podcast topics, it is very much for you as a community. It's totally for you, but selfishly, we also like a lot of these topics are because Sarah and I want to learn about them too. So we sort of, hopefully it benefits both of us, like us and Sarah together, and you too. Has anyone read the book before we did? I know one person obviously bought the book for their manager, but has anyone else read the book before we kind of dive into the 5 dysfunctions? What else? I have Lucy's read it. I look at that, honestly, New York Times bestseller. I'm like, oh, one day we will have a book that says that at the top. That's the dream. And we'll be sharing Squiggly far and wide. I've said it now. It's like manifesting, like communicating it to the community. Okay, so Joe's used it too. Morning, Joe. Okay, so a couple of us read it. Don't worry if you haven't read it. And we're going to do the amazing if summary. Watch the 3-minute video. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to diagnose some dysfunctions. I want you to think about the team that you are in today, or if you're not in a team at the moment, maybe kind of think about a recent team that you were in. I'm going to quickly go through what are the 5 dysfunctions, and then I thought we could do stars on screen. Like, what do you think is your biggest team dysfunction at the moment? So dysfunction number 1, absence of trust. So that looks like, we're sort of checking in on each other's work. There's a fear of people making mistakes. Lots, people aren't like talking about tough stuff. Kind of that kind of fear culture is creeping in when there's a low level of trust. Also, people probably aren't asking for help because they worry, what people will think or what's going to get said about them. I think also when there's an absence of trust, often there's kind of lots of conversations going on outside of the room, because we're worried about what people think or what will happen to us. I think there's probably like more gossip that goes on. You kind of get that sense that those sort of chats coming on. So dysfunction number 1, an absence of trust. Dysfunction number 2, a fear of conflict. So this looks like we only have nice conversations. Everything's amazing all of the time, and we only ever talk about the positive stuff. And we can't have a tough conversation. We can't discuss our differences. We can't debate disagreements. Differences of opinion. People's opinions are getting quashed. Potentially, the most senior person in the room says the way things should be done, and everybody else doesn't get the opportunity to have an alternative point of view, because kind of conflict is bad in a dysfunctional team. A lack of commitment. So we start loads of stuff, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And we say we're going to do stuff, but it never really gets done. And there's this continual feeling that we're kind of a bit all talk. This high-performing team, some great ideas that never get implemented. And so kind of a lack of commitment to what we're trying to do. Kind of, I think I've been in teams that are very shiny. Like, they look good on the surface, but there's sort of not lots of substance to them. Like, there's kind of not lots of stuff coming out. Avoidance of accountability. So this is where, you know, there's a lot of like that slopey shoulder thing. Like there's no one's really putting their hand up and going, you know, I will take that forward. There's sort of a lack of clarity about who's doing what, or kind of just people just aren't kind of stepping forward, or projects aren't being matched to people's strengths. I sometimes think when there's a high level of accountability, what happens is, even if it's not your job, you might say, well, do you know what? Either I've got the time to be able to do that, so I put my hand up, or I've got the ability to do that. So I recognize, Helen, that that's part of your job, but actually, I think I've got a better attention to detail to you. And I think that's something that I would do better. Like, it's almost like you take accountability, I think, for your actions in a very broad way. It's not just doing what you say, it's doing what you know you can do for the benefit of the team. Like that, it's that. Like, my accountability is I can improve the performance of this team because I've got a talent that I want to contribute, and I'm going to sort of take accountability for that talent. I think that's what it comes from as well, versus, well, it's not my job to do, so I'm not going to do it. And then the last one is an inattention to results. So this one, it tends to be where we get distracted so much by everything else that's going on, emails, competing priorities, the meetings that we're in, all that kind of stuff. You know, it's pretty normal, I think. But as a result of that distraction, we're not delivering on results. And sometimes that can be because there's not a lot of clarity about what the most important things are for the team, for example. So you might have individual clarity, but it doesn't connect with like team clarity. Or sometimes it's just we just kind of keep kicking the can down the road a little bit. It's like, well, I've got 21 meetings this week, so I'm just going to leave that until next week. But next week I've got 22 meetings, and it's sort of like the big stuff never gets delivered. So these are the 5 dysfunctions of low performing teams. What I would love to know is stars on screens, and I'll explain how to do that in a second for anyone that's new. But which one of these dysfunctions can you sort of recognize in the team that you're in today? I'm just going to double check. I'm pretty sure I put this on like anonymous. Yeah, so it's anonymous. So I'm mainly saying that to my team. I'm like, team, you can say whatever you want, but like put your stars on your screen with like, which one of these can you like see in your team today? For anybody that's new, or maybe just forgotten, Lucy's put in the chat how you do this. But if you go towards the top of your Zoom screen, you should see view options. And then like click on that, you'll get to annotate, and then it's stamp, and then it's star. So if you just follow Lucy's instructions, that'd be great. Also, while you're doing that, little random story, at the Squiggly Quiz Live this week, it was really lovely. Someone was like, "Are you Lucy?" I think you can see Lucy on my screen. Are you Lucy? Because like every week I'm like, Lucy, could you put it in the chat? Lucy, can you share a link? It made me very happy, very happy when people feel like they know our team, because our team are in all of our sessions and everywhere. It makes me happy. What do we got? Oh, I mean, I don't know if this is really telling us a strong, like, there's one dysfunction that's bigger than the others. I feel like it's saying we've all got lots of dysfunctions going on our team. What do you think, everybody? Maybe conflict? Maybe I feel like that's the one where the stars went first. Like everyone's like, yes, we've got a very much lack of conflict. Where I always think it's like where everyone's sort of need to be nice gets in the way of growth. I think that can sometimes happen with conflict. Sometimes it's a fear, like, well, if I raise a different opinion, that's going to result in a very difficult conversation. So sometimes I think it is fear. Sometimes I think it's like capability. Like people don't know how to talk about something, or they don't quite know where to start with sort of a different point of view. So sometimes it's cultural. I think sometimes it's capability. Fear, you can't find the start thing. Don't worry, you've got an arrow with your name on it. I mean, great work. Okay, so planners. I also wanted to spot some strengths, so I'm just gonna let me clear all your lovely stars and Fee's very special arrow. I also, so kind of broad mix, but I'd say probably the one that popped there as the biggest one was conflict. I also thought, let's not be completely negative. Let's spot some strengths. Which one of these do you think your team do well? So have you got high levels of trust? Do you have constructive conflict? Have you got clear commitment? Is there ownership and accountability? Have you got a clear drive for results? Which one of these do you think you do well? Which one of you? Ah, Susie, that's nice. Well, Susie, you'll be sharing your tips with us shortly. Because wherever you're sticking your stars, everybody, there's obviously something that's going on really like well in your team. So I thought, as I share some actions, we can maybe get some of your contributions into, do a bit of like sort of crowdsourcing in terms of ideas. So what are our team doing well? looks like trust and commitment might be the ones that are popping out here. So our biggest issue is potentially that fear of conflict. But as a group, the things that are going well in our team look like we've got high levels of trust, clear commitment, look like the ones. Sam saying, I've seen it's easy to conflate psychological safety with never having conflict. Yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Like the more you kind of read and know about stuff, I suppose. I look at team performance, growth mindset, and psychological safety as like concepts. So if you take Patrick Lencioni's work and you take Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset and you take Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety, and I think they sort of mash together in quite a helpful way. But I kind of think, well, you can't have trust without psychological safety, and you can't have somebody who's willing to learn about constructive conflict unless they've got a growth mindset. So it does all mash together. If you're like, I have no idea what those concepts are, Helen, please don't worry. You don't need to be an expert in like career development psychology, but we have done podcasts on it. So if you're like, oh, I'd like to learn more about that, some of those topics could be interesting to you. Yeah, interesting, Julie, isn't it? All right. So I thought what we'd do is we'll go through each one in turn, and I'll just share a couple of ideas for action. So some stuff that maybe we sort of talked about on the podcast, and some stuff I think I've just thought about since as I was reflecting this morning on what would be useful to share. Just some different ideas for action that might be useful for you to know about. Got 10 minutes, so I'll do like 2 minutes on each topic. Always speedy. But if you've got some extra ideas to add, please do pop them into chat as we go. So let's start with trust, because this was the one that you like. I think lots of you are like, we've got a high trust team. This is something that we do well. On the podcast, we talk about basically pick up the phone. It's like, seems like an obvious action, Helen. But the point is, the research shows that the teams that have higher levels of trust talk to each other. I know that's like a really obvious thing to say, but you know, when it's really easy to just like email each other or Teams message each other all the time, that is quite a transactional way of communicating with people. And I actually think the more you do it, the more transactional it gets. It's like a couple of, I'll get it, you get it, can you email? What, you know, it's like transactional communication. It's efficient, but it's not necessarily effective for building trust. And the thing that builds trust is like hearing someone's voice. The amount of things that we pick up when we are listening, like the tone, the pace, the pitch, like the care we can communicate in a conversation with somebody is much higher than a message that we might share on Slack or Teams or stuff like that. So I'm not saying never do that stuff, but I think be conscious of how often you're picking up the phone to talk to somebody. And next time you're sending a Teams message or a Slack message or whatever it is you're doing, maybe just think, oh, actually, would a quick call be better? Sometimes it's quicker as well. Sometimes it is quicker just be like, should we have a quick call and get on the phone, rather than kind of going back and forth over messages all the time. The other thing that I think is really useful here is making sure people feel comfortable asking for help. So a big part of what creates a high trust team is people being willing to ask for help. Now, there's a whole load of reasons why people find asking for help difficult. You know, they worry that what people will think of them. They don't want to be a bother, all that kind of stuff. So I think a useful starting point as a team conversation could be, you get people sharing, what are you finding hard at work at the moment? And that might be my workload, a particular stakeholder, like a deadline I'm struggling with, and what help would you need to resolve it? I think if you create a team conversation where everyone shares what's one thing you're finding hard at the moment and what help might you need to resolve it, you're not necessarily asking for the help. So I'm not saying to Lucy directly, oh, Lucy, can you help me with this project? But what I am just kind of putting out into the world is going, I'm finding it hard to fit writing our third book in. True fact. I'd really appreciate some help with relooking at my diary and working out how I can block some time out. And actually, I'm not pointing that help at one particular person, which can sometimes feel hard. I'm sort of putting it out there for the team to solve. So this kind of like don't always try and solve it yourself is quite a good approach. Interesting with hybrid offices about trust. Brilliant. What's fun? I was saying, I love talking, having discussions. Summarize chat into an email. Okay, all right. Anything else on trust? What's Victoria saying? We're a remote team and also communicating with other remote teams. I try to not to think I've talked to the IT team. Okay, yeah. So talk to a person. That's a really nice point, Victoria, actually. Sometimes we get generic and just lump people in like the team rather than focusing on the person. Okay, so that's trust. I'm going to move us on just because I want to make sure that I fit everything in. I'm also going to remove those rogue stars on there. So the next thing that contributes to a high performing team is constructive conflict. This is one thing that we are trying out at the moment. So it's an experiment. I don't know if this is going to work, but what Sarah and I were talking about was this idea of sort of the knots. Some stuff in our team that we think might not be working as well as it could do, and it's sort of creating a bit of a knot in our progress, like it's slowing us down a little bit. And Sarah and I were like, oh, that feels like a bit of a knot. So maybe the fact that I'm a bottleneck for lots of things, like I'm the person who has loads of logons for our business, for example. So if I'm not around, I'm a bit of a bottleneck, which means it's not working very well for the team. And so we're doing a session where we're like doing name the knots, and the team in a non-judgmental way, like it's not Helen, you're holding us back, which that would feel hard to say and probably hard for me to hear. It is just in a very neutral way, what's not working, like name the knots. And then as a team, so we're actually, the way that we're going to do this, we're going to do it on Miro. And what we're going to do is get everyone to think in advance of the meeting about what's not working. And they're going to put it on Miro, almost like a Post-it note. So the way we run our team meetings, we don't think is working, or whatever it is. The way that we communicate with each other, we don't think is working at the moment well. And then we're going to see like how many people have got the same knots. So you might be like, oh, 3 people have got the same knot. And then it becomes kind of a bigger knot. And then as a team, we're going to try and resolve that stuff. So we're trying to create a session and a way of talking about some stuff that might feel a bit difficult because it's, you know, it's not helping people be at their best. The other thing that I find is interesting is to talk about tensions. So, for example, I think one tension that we sometimes have in our team is we have a very kind of flexible way of working. Everyone in our team can sort of decide when, where, how they want to work. But sometimes that creates a bit of a tension with responsiveness because you're not always sure, oh, is that person working then or not? Or, oh gosh, that thing needs replying to today, but that person doesn't work in that way on that day. And so sometimes we need to be highly responsive. Like if a client has got a question or something's gone wrong on social media, like there needs to be a high level of responsiveness, or our assumption is that there should be. Maybe we challenge that. And so I think sometimes just talking about team tensions, but again, it's not blame. It's just like, what tensions are we working with? So either of those things might help you to do constructive conflict. I'm just going to keep, oh, Jessica, it's both. It's a play on words. So knots, because everything we do is quite visual. So it's the idea, like it feels knotty, if that makes sense, but it feels knotty because it's not working. I mean, it might be a play on words too far. We'll see. It could be part of the experiment. I'm going to keep going because I've got 4 minutes and 3 to go. But please, if you've got ideas that you think other people could benefit from, pop it into chat for us. So the next thing around commitment, this is quite a simple thing, really. But if everyone's got loads of sort of what's, if your day is full of lots of what's to work on, so I need to send that email, do that presentation, speak to that person, attend that meeting, blah, 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 blah. It's a lot of what's, and it's hard to prioritize, and it's hard to know where to start first. And to be honest, it's hard to have a lot of energy about it, right? It's just a long list of like stuff I've got to get done. And so to create commitment, we need to connect the what's to the why, and to help people to see how the things that they are working on day to day connect to the bigger picture. So I might say, oh, well, those 3 things might look like pretty tactical emails or whatever, but actually it all connects to our mission to become the global go-to for career development. Or you might not think that event that we're organizing is very important, but actually it connects with our ambition to make Squiggly synonymous with careers. And so helping people see how their what's connect to the why creates more commitment. It basically, because it's emotional, it helps kind of see the bigger picture. And what's are quite tactical, transactional, whys connect with emotion. Anytime we connect work with emotion, it's more likely to start to stick. And again, you can do that with a team. You can kind of, like everyone can go through their what's, and then we can start seeing how they connect to whys. And if people are spending a lot of time on what's and it can't be connected to a why, maybe we shouldn't be doing that. Maybe that's part of the conversation. Like, why are we doing that if you can't connect the work with the why? Exactly, Julia. That is what it made me think of as well. But that story, I always feel it's a bit trite. Have you heard that story, everybody? It's like someone was sweeping the floor at NASA, and they were like, oh, the janitor story. Like, why are you doing that? I'm helping put a man on the moon. It is that, but I always feel it's a little bit of a cringe story. Two more to go through. Accountability. Oh, I'm getting very distracted by some good ideas. I'm very distracted by some good ideas that go in chat. Ownership and accountability. If you've got in your team, you're feeling like people just aren't taking ownership. I think one of the most effective things that you can do is you can get people buddying up on work. So there is a lot of accountability in peer-to-peer relationships. I think more sometimes than when a manager asks someone to do something. So I think if you are buddying up with somebody else in a team, I think that creates a lot more accountability between two people. Not only that, you've got loads more learning going on. I think this is a win-win when people buddy up on projects a lot more. You learn about each other's area, so you're less dependent on one person knowing everything. It creates accountability and probably gets the work done better and faster too. Like, I just think it's a win-win when we have that stuff going on. And then last one I want to talk about, inattention to results. I think here either making sure, basically it's team goals. So I think you can either have the team top three. So that the context here is everyone getting distracted by the day job. So I think you either have the team top three, like what are we all working together on, and keeping that really visible. Or I don't know if any of you seen that thing, the rocks, pebbles, sand. I've done this quite a few times. Maybe we should do this with our team. But the idea here is you've got to talk as a team about your rocks, pebbles, and sand. And sand is like the small stuff that distracts you every day. Your pebbles are like the small initiatives that you're working on, so they feel more like a project. And the rocks are like the big strategic goals. And the idea is, if you imagine like a jar, I'll be quick, everyone, because I know you've got time. But if you start with a jar and you fill it with sand, it's really hard to get the pebbles in. It's really hard to get the rocks in. Like, you can't fit all the work in if your jar's full of sand. But if you start with the rocks, so you put the big things in first, then you put the pebbles in, then the sand can kind of fill around it. Does that make sense? I know I've talked through that very quickly, and there are some exercises that you can find online about it. But the point is, if everyone starts with the sand, you can't fit the rocks in. And so talking to the team, you start with, what are our rocks? What are our big strategic objectives? What are the projects, the pebbles? And then what stuff feels like sand? Because you might be able, between you, to get rid of some of this stuff as well. When you talk about what stuff feels like sand, you might be able to get rid of it, because the biggest impact comes from the rocks. Hope that helps. Appreciate I crammed a lot in, as ever, everybody. Maybe have a listen to the podcast or look at the pod sheet if you'd like a slightly more slower, considered way of talking about it. But I hope it was helpful. Back next week. Next week's topic is all about clarity. How do we create clarity? You know, when it's messy and noisy and a bit naughty, what kind of stuff can we do to create clarity at work? So have a good day, everybody. Have a good rest of your week. Hope to see you again soon. Bye for now, everybody. Take care. See you soon. Bye.